Ladies and gentlemen, entrepreneurs and dreamers, never tell people what you do. Now you might be thinking, Jim, that sounds counterintuitive. Shouldn't we be proud of our work and share it with the world? And to that I say, hold on to your seats. Because we're about to embark on a journey that will challenge your thinking and potentially change the way you approach your life and business. You see, when I say never tell people what you do, I'm not suggesting that you should keep your profession a secret or hide your talents under a bushel. No, what I'm talking about is a fundamental shift in how you present yourself to the world. It's about moving from simply stating your job title or describing your daily tasks to showcasing the value you bring to the table. When someone asks you what you do, what's your typical response? Do you say, I'm a salesperson, or I run a small business, or I'm a teacher? If so, you're missing out on a golden opportunity to make a lasting impression and open doors to new possibilities. You see, when you simply tell people what you do, you're putting yourself in a box. You're limiting their perception of you, and more importantly, you're limiting your own potential. Instead of telling people what you do, tell them what you create, what problems you solve, what value you bring to the world. So let me give you an example. Years ago, I met a gentleman at a conference. When I asked him what he did, he didn't say, I'm a financial advisor. Instead, he said, I help people sleep better at night by securing their financial future. Now, which response do you think made a more powerful impression? Which one would you be more interested in learning more about? It's by focusing on the outcome of his work rather than his job title. This gentleman immediately set himself apart. He piqued my curiosity and made me want to know more. And that, my friends, is the power of never telling people what you do, but instead telling them what you create. Now, I can see some of you shifting in your seats. You're thinking, but Jim, isn't that just semantics? Isn't it all the same thing in the end? And to that I say, absolutely not. The words we use have power. They shape not only how others perceive us, but also how we perceive ourselves. When you focus on what you create rather than what you do, you're forced to think bigger. You're compelled to consider the impact of your work, not just the tasks you perform. And in doing so, you elevate your own thinking and your own potential. So let me share another story with you. I once knew a woman who owned a small bakery. When asked what she did, she used to say, I bake cakes. And while that was technically true, it didn't capture the essence of her work or the value she brought to her customers. So I challenged her to think differently. After some reflection, she changed her response. Next time someone asked her what she did, she said, I create moments of joy and celebration in people's lives. Now, doesn't that sound much more compelling? Doesn't that make you want to know more about her business? You see, by shifting her focus from the task baking cakes to the outcome creating moments of joy, this woman not only changed how others perceived her business, but also how she perceived it herself. She started to see her work as more meaningful, more impactful. And as a result, her business began to thrive. Now I want you to take a moment and think about your own work. What do you create? What problems do you solve? What value do you bring to the world? These are the questions you should be asking yourself. And these are the answers you should be sharing with others. But here's the thing, this shift in perspective doesn't happen overnight. It requires conscious effort and practice. It requires you to dig deep and really understand the true value of your work. And that, my friends, is where personal development comes in. See, the ability to articulate your value, to communicate the impact of your works is a skill. And like any skill, it can be developed and honed over time. It requires self-reflection. It requires studying. It requires practice. But the payoff is immense. When you can clearly and compellingly communicate the value you bring to the world, you open doors to new opportunities. You attract like-minded individuals who appreciate what you have to offer. You set yourself apart in a crowded marketplace. And perhaps most importantly, you reinforce your own sense of purpose and worth. Now I can hear some of you thinking, but Jim, isn't this just a fancy way of bragging? Isn't it better to be humble? And to that I say, there's a big difference between bragging and confidently articulating your value. Bragging is about inflating your own ego. Articulating your value is about helping others understand how you can serve them. Just remember, the goal here is not to impress people with what you do. The goal is to inspire them with what you create, to show them how you can solve their problems or improve their lives. It's about them, not you. So let me give you another example. Once met a young man who was just starting out in his career. When I asked him what he did, he hesitated for a moment, then said, well, I'm just an entry-level marketing assistant. I could hear the lack of confidence in his voice, the apology in his tone. So I asked him, But what do you create in that role? What value do you bring to your company? He thought for a moment, then his eyes lit up. He said, I help our company reach new customers and grow their business. I create connections between our products and the people who need them. Do you see the difference? In the first response, he was diminishing his role, almost apologizing for it. But in the second response, he was showcasing the value he brought to his company, regardless of his job title or level of experience. And that's the key, my friends. Your value is not determined by your job title or years of experience. Your value is determined by the impact you make, by what you create, by the problems you solve. Now I want to address something important here. When I say never tell people what you do, I'm not advocating for being vague or evasive. I'm not suggesting that you should hide your profession or be ashamed of your work. Far from it. What I'm advocating for is a more meaningful, more impactful way of communicating your value. You see, when you focus on what you create rather than what you do, you're inviting a deeper conversation. You're opening the door to a more meaningful connection. And in today's world, where so many of our interactions are superficial and fleeting, that kind of genuine connection is more valuable than ever. So let me share another story with you. I once knew a man who was a janitor at a large corporation. Now many people in his position might feel embarrassed or ashamed when asked what they do. They might mumble something about maintenance or cleaning and quickly change the subject. But not this man. When asked what he did, he would say with pride, I create an environment where people can do their best work. I ensure that when our employees come to the office, they have a clean, safe, and pleasant space where they can focus on their jobs without distraction. Now, isn't that powerful? Is that a much more compelling way to describe his work than simply saying I'm a janitor? By focusing on the outcome of his work rather than the tasks he performed, this man elevated not only how others perceived him, but also how he perceived himself. And that's the real power of never telling people what you do. Not just about how others see you, it's about how you see yourself. It's about recognizing and appreciating the true value of your work regardless of your job title or position. Now I can see some of you nodding your heads. You're starting to see the potential in this approach, but I can also see some skepticism. You're thinking, Jim, this sounds great in theory, but how do I actually put it into practice? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. You see, shifting from telling people what you do to telling them what you create isn't just a matter of changing a few words. It requires a fundamental shift in your thinking, in your perspective on your work and your role in the world. The first step in this process is self-reflection. You need to take a step back and really examine your work. Ask yourself, what is the ultimate outcome of what I do? Who benefits from my work and how? What problems do I solve? What value do I bring to the table? These aren't always easy questions to answer, especially if you've been in the same role for a long time. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day tasks and lose sight of the bigger picture. But I promise you, taking the time to reflect on these questions will be invaluable. So let me give you an example. I once worked with a woman who was a customer service representative for a large corporation. When I asked her what she did, her initial response was, I answer phone calls and handle customer complaints. But when I pushed her to think deeper about the impact of her work, her perspective shifted. After some reflection, she realized that what she really did was solve problems for people when they were frustrated or upset. She created positive experiences out of negative situations. She turned potential lost customers into loyal brand advocates. Now, doesn't that sound much more impactful than simply answering phone calls? You see, by digging deeper and focusing on the outcomes of her work, rather than the task she performed, this woman gained a new appreciation for her role. And more importantly, she was able to communicate her value in a way that was much more compelling and meaningful. Now, once you've done the self-reflection and identified the true value of your work, the next step is to practice articulating it. This is where many people struggle. They understand their value, but they have trouble putting it into words. My advice, start by creating a simple, clear statement that focuses on the outcome of your work. We often call this an elevator pitch, something you could say in the time it takes to ride an elevator with someone. But I prefer to think of it as your value statement. Your value statement should be concise, specific, and focused on the benefits you provide. It should answer the question, what problem do I solve? Or what value do I create? Rather than what task do I perform? So back to our customer service representative. Her value statement might be something like this. I turn frustrated customers into loyal brand advocates by solving their problems and creating positive experiences. See how that captures the essence of her work in a way that's much more compelling than I answer phone calls. Now I want to address something important here. Some of you might be thinking, but Jim, I don't have a glamorous job. I can't make my work sound exciting or important. And to that, I say, every job, every role creates value in some way. If it didn't, the job wouldn't exist. Your task is to identify that value and articulate it clearly. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO or an entry-level employee, a brain surgeon or a street sweeper. Every role has value and every role solves a problem or meets a need. Take our janitor from earlier. His job might not be considered glamorous by some, but by focusing on the outcome of his work, creating an environment where people can do their best work. He elevated not only how others perceived him, but also how he perceived himself. Now, once you've crafted your value statement, the next step is to practice, practice, practice. Use it when you meet new people. Use it in networking events. Use it in job interviews. The more you use it, the more natural it will become, and the more confident you'll be in articulating your value. Here's the thing, value statement isn't set in stone. As you grow, as your skills develop, as your role evolves, your value statement should evolve too. That's why it's important to regularly reflect on your work and reassess the value you bring to the table. Now I want to address another question that might be on your minds. Some of you might be thinking, Jim, this all sounds great for business or professional settings, but what about in social situations? Won't I sound pretentious if I start talking about a value I create at a dinner party? And that's a fair question. The key here is context and delivery. You don't want to sound like you're reciting a memorized script or giving a sales pitch. The goal is to engage in meaningful conversation, not to impress or intimidate. In social situations, you might start with a more casual version of your value statement, then let the conversation flow naturally from there. If someone asks what you do, you might say something like, well, I work in customer service, but what I really do is help turn frustrated customers into happy ones. That opens the door for further conversation without sounding overly formal or rehearsed. Remember, the goal here isn't to avoid talking about your job or your role. It's to frame it in a way that highlights its value and opens the door to more meaningful conversation. Now let's talk about another important aspect of never telling people. What you do, it forces you to continually grow and evolve. You see, when you focus on the value you create rather than the tasks you perform, you naturally start thinking about how you can create even more value. Let me give you an example. I once knew a man who owned a small landscaping business. When asked what he did, he used to say, I mow lawns and trim hedges. But after we worked together on reframing his perspective, he started saying, I enhance property values and create beautiful outdoor spaces for families to enjoy. Now, here's the interesting part. Once he started thinking about his work in terms of enhancing property values and creating enjoyable spaces, he began to see new opportunities for his business. He started learning about landscape design, about creating outdoor living areas, about eco-friendly gardening practices. In other words, by focusing on the value created rather than the tasks he performed, he expanded his vision of what was possible. And as a result, his business grew and evolved. This is the power of never telling people what you do. It's not just about how you communicate with others. It's about how you think about your own work and your own potential. It's about constantly asking yourself, how can I create more value? How can I solve bigger problems? How can I make a greater impact? Now I can see some of you shifting in your seats. You're thinking, but Jim, this sounds like a lot of pressure. Do I always have to be thinking about creating more value, solving bigger problems? And to that, I say, it's not about pressure. It's about opportunity. Well, you see, when you start thinking in terms of the value you create, you open yourself up to new possibilities. You start seeing opportunities where others see obstacles. You start thinking creatively about how you can apply your skills and knowledge in new ways. Let me share another story with you. I once worked with a teacher who was feeling burnt out and unappreciated. When I asked her what she did, she sighed and said, I teach 4th grade. You could hear the weariness in her voice. But when we started talking about the value she created, her whole demeanor changed. She realized that what she really did was shape young minds, inspire curiosity, and lay the foundation for lifelong learning. She wasn't just teaching 4th grade. She was helping to mold the next generation of thinkers, leaders, and innovators. Once she started thinking about her work in these terms, She found a renewed sense of purpose and enthusiasm. She started looking for new ways to inspire her students, new methods to make learning engaging and fun. She even started a after-school program to help struggling students. See, by focusing on the value she created rather than tasks, she performed. This teacher not only changed how she saw her work, but also how she approached it. She went from feeling burnout to feeling inspired and motivated. And that's what I want for all of you. I want you to feel inspired by your work, to feel motivated to create more value, solve bigger problems, to make a greater impact. Because when you're focused on creating value, you're not just doing a job, you're making a difference. Now, I want to address something that some of you might be thinking. You might be worried that by focusing on the value you create, you're somehow diminishing the importance of the actual tasks you perform. You might be thinking, but Jim, don't the day-to-day tasks matter? Isn't it important to be good at what we do? And to that, absolutely. The tasks you perform are important. Being skilled and proficient at your job is crucial. But here's the thing. The tasks are the means, not the end. They're the how, not the why. When you focus on the value you create, you're not ignoring the tasks. You're putting them in context. You're reminding yourself and others of why those tasks matter. You're connecting the dots between what you do day to day and the ultimate impact of your work. So let's go back to our teacher for a moment. When she focuses on shaping young minds, inspiring curiosity, she's not ignoring the importance of lesson planning, grading papers, or managing classroom behavior. She's putting those tasks in context. She's reminding herself that every lesson plan, every graded paper, every managed conflict is part of a bigger picture, the shaping of young minds and the inspiration of curiosity. And here's the beautiful thing. When you keep that bigger picture in mind, those day-to-day tasks take on new meaning. They become more than just items on a to-do list. They become steps toward a greater goal, pieces of a larger puzzle. Now, I want to talk about another important aspect. Never telling people what you do. It changes the dynamics of your interactions. When you focus on the value you create rather than your job title or tasks, you invite deeper, more meaningful conversations. You open the door to connections based on shared values and interests rather than superficial commonalities. This approach also puts you in a position of strength in any interaction. Instead of being defined by your job title or position in a company hierarchy, you're defined by the value you bring to the table. This can be particularly powerful in networking situations, job interviews, or business negotiations. When you clearly articulate the value you create, you're not just another applicant or business owner. You're a problem solver, a value creator, someone who can make a real difference. In conclusion, never telling people what you do is about much more than changing the words you used to describe your work. It's about shifting your perspective, reframing your value, and continually seeking ways to create more impact. It's not seeing yourself not as a job title or a set of tasks, but as a creator of value, a solver of problems, a force for positive change in the world. So I challenge you. Stop telling people what you do. Start telling them what you create. Because when you do that, you not only change how others see you, you change how you see yourself. And that, my friends, is where true transformation